The story starts with a mysterious dude who's fighting goblins, like it's no big deal. Who is this guy? Then the story goes back in time to before the Goblin Massacre. A merchant cart was carrying some goods when it was attacked by a group of goblins. The goblins jumped onto the cart, but luckily, the same adventurers were nearby. Their leader rode a horse to protect the archer while he shot down the goblins. The long-haired dude easily dealt with some monsters with his quick and smooth skills, while the huge dude did his best impression of Hulk smash with his double-handed axe. After that, they returned to the city. Back in the city, there's a very hungry-looking guy guarding the city gate. So, the name of this hungry dude is Fate Graphite, and yeah, he's the main character in this anime. When Fate heard some adventurers talking about defeating the goblins, he just fell silent because he didn't think he could do it. All he felt was hungry, and it's all because of his weird skill, Gluttony. Meanwhile, in the center of the city, everyone was getting out of the way of 3 holy knights. People bowed down to them because they were terrified of how cruel they were. Just because an orange accidentally rolled to one of their feet, the owner of the fruit was scared that the knights would execute him. Luckily, one of the 3 rotten knights forgave him, but he warned him not to do it again. Unfortunately, the 3 rotten knights approached Fate. We cut back to our useless protagonist Fate, who's still complaining about his hunger. Luckily, his shift is almost over until the trio arrives. They ask if Fate did a proper job to fill in for them today. Fate lowers his head and confirms he did. The leader of the trio then drops a few coins on the floor as payment and tells Fate to pick it up. Fate complies and slowly starts picking the coins up. But one of the holy knights steps on his hand. He starts insulting Fate, saying that he's so filthy that he didn't notice him. And as you expect, Fate is a bullied person who has no way to fight back. His stomach makes noise again, making the leader of the trio mad. He claims that this noise makes it seem like they don't feed him. They ask if Fate is trying to embarrass the Vlarik family and kick him away. The guy kicks Fate a few more times, and the girl joins in. She starts calling Fate's skills useless, and says that he only survives because they give him money. In his mind, Fate explains that in this world, everyone's worth depends on the special power they got from gods, called skills. The trio leader claims that if Fate slacks off, the result will reflect on them, his employers. The guy then orders Fate to get up, but when he tries, the other guy steps on his face and asks him to hurry up. Then, in the middle of it all, my waifu, another knight showed up. She was totally different from the 3 jerks. Her name is Roxy Hart. Even though she told the 3 jerks to stop bullying Fate, they just said that's how they discipline their men. After the 3 trash NPCs left, Roxy immediately went to Fate and helped him up. She even helped him clean the tomato juice off his face. Once he was somewhat clean, Fate thanked her. Roxy then asked Fate to take turns guarding the gate with her. She was so worried about him that she even asked him to tell her if the 3 knights oppressed him again. But of course, Fate wasn't going to do that. No way a guy would spill his guts to a woman. Long story short, Fate was eating at his favorite restaurant. The bartender there knew Fate had been bullied again, and he was worried that Fate would end up like the other guys who had the job before him. After leaving the restaurant, Fate was still hungry, even though he had just eaten. He wished he didn't have the gluttony skill, which was just a curse. He didn't want to be a holy knight, he just wanted to live a normal life. Not long after, Fate saw some thieves sneaking into the palace. He immediately told Roxy. She took off after them, leaving Fate in charge of the gate. When the fighting stopped, Fate thought Roxy had taken care of all the thieves. So, one of the thieves got away. Fate was terrified, and he started to run. But then he remembered Roxy had left him in charge, so he stopped and fought the thief. He was still scared, but he managed to beat the thief. Then, something weird happened. Fate's gluttony skill activated, and he suddenly gained the skills Identify and Telepathy. He was confused. A few minutes later, Roxy came running. She was worried about Fate. Fate was surprised because he could hear Roxy's thoughts. Roxy wanted to report the incident to her superiors, but Fate asked her not to mention his name. He didn't want to get in trouble. Roxy was still grateful to Fate, so she offered him a job working for the Hart family. She also offered to help him deal with his problems with Vlariks. Fate was torn. He didn't know if he wanted to work with the 3 trash knights or with the beautiful Roxy. but he was worried about who would replace him if he left. Roxy assured Fate that Holy Knight would take over his job, and she would handle everything with Vlerix. In the end, Fate decided to work for Roxy. Fate was stoked to see his stats had shot up to 3 digits, and he had 2 new skills, Identify and Telepathy. He was baffled about what was going on with his body. He felt like with stats like that, he might actually be able to take on some monsters. The next day, Fate went to the market to buy a sword. He only had 2 silver coins though. He was so poor, it was tragic. The merchant said he couldn't buy a weapon with that. All he could get was a weapon from the trash bin. Fate decided he'd rather have something than nothing, so he started looking through the trash. They were all trash until he picked up one, and suddenly he heard a voice. Fate felt like the weapon was calling to him. The weapon said his name is Greed, and they had a lot in common. Then Fate bought the trash weapon for 2 silver coins. Memil was pissed that Roxy took Fate from them. She wanted to teach Roxy a lesson for being rude to the Vlerix family. Rafale, on the other hand, didn't think it was a big deal. He said that Fate wasn't important to them. The Hearts and the Vlerix were 2 of the 5 great families that supported the kingdom. Rafale then said that he was going to the military district. Rafale was interested in becoming immortal, but Memil laughed at him. On the other hand, Fate was still getting used to his new sword. When the sword warned him of incoming enemies, Fate panicked, but he quickly defeated the goblin that attacked him with a single slash. The sword's other voice, Greed, explained that Fate's Gluttony skill had activated and increased his stats, including giving him the Strength Boost skill. Fate was confused, but more goblins arrived. Greed laughed and said that goblins always came in groups. The goblins attacked Fate, but he parried and sliced them one by one, his Gluttony skill activating each time. After a few hours, Fate had defeated hundreds of goblins. He had gained a few more skills, and his stats were now incredibly high, with his lowest stat being nearly 500, and his strength being triple that. Greed asked if Fate was still hungry, and Fate realized that his stomach hadn't made a noise all day. He asked Greed what was going on, and Greed explained that it was all because of Gluttony. Normally, people had to fight and win battles to increase their stats or level up, but Gluttony was a cheat skill that stole the stats and skills of whatever Fate defeated. A person's skill cannot be changed since birth, but Fate's Gluttony skill allows him to gain new skills with the consequence of not gaining level up points. That's why he's stuck at level 1. Fate asked how Greed knew about this, and the sword explained that they were the same. Despite being confused, Fate noticed a group of adventurers approaching. Greed told him that he shouldn't let anyone know about his Gluttony skill, because it defied the divine law. Fate realized that this meant he couldn't party up and had to always fight alone. Greed said that Fate wasn't alone because he had Greed. Fate accepted this and decided to return to the city, but Greed stopped him and told him to collect the goblin's ears so he could sell them for money. Fate was reluctant, but he did it, a master and a strange weapon, and earned 3 silver and 80 bronze coins. After taking his reward, Fate planned to eat meat. However, Greed wanted himself to be cared for first like a gem. Suddenly, a man bumped into Fate. A little girl was with a suspicious man. She touched Fate and begged for help. Her eyes were shaking with fear, and the man pulled her away. Fate tried to use his skill to see the man's skills, but the information quickly disappeared. Greed explained that the man had a concealment ability that hid his skills from being identified. Greed asked what Fate would do, and Fate said that he would save the girl. The man took the girl to a warehouse and chained her to the wall. He started mocking her, saying that she would be abused by the holy knights. Fate was watching, but Greed stopped him from moving. Greed said that the man was stronger than Fate and that he should look away. But Fate wanted to help anyone he saw suffering, especially now that he had the power to do it. In another place, a church lady talks to some unhappy kids who have no parents. She doesn't try to find them a family, but tells them about the holy La Place, who made their world. When La Place left the world, she gave the people special abilities called skills. The kids wish she had given them some parents instead. They can only eat if they say thank you, so they do. One kid is very angry though. He doesn't eat like the others and says that the holy La Place is unfair. The holy warriors and knights have great skills, but he has a very weak one. His weak skill might be the reason why his parents never came back from buying milk. The church lady says that in the old days, when Laplace guarded the world, there were no skills or stats, and no monsters either. Everyone was the same back then. This sounds like paradise to the kid who has no one, and he wishes he was born then. Suddenly, another church lady comes and says that she can't find one of the kids who is lost. She goes on with her search, and the other church lady wonders where Sahara, the girl, has disappeared. Near Fate, we see that Sahara is the girl he followed. The kidnapper hits a steel beam with his anger and leaves, maybe because it was painful and he didn't want to admit it. But this gives Fate the chance he was looking for to save the girl. Sadly, the bad guy was right there and mocks Fate for being like all the other stupid heroes who fight him for some wrong idea of justice. The evil man says that Fate has no hope of beating him, especially while guarding the girl. Fate wants to get her to a safe place, but he doesn't know where that is. Luckily, Greed has a plan and tells Fate to move back. The bad guy with the bandana thinks Fate is weaker than him, so Greed thinks they can use his arrogance. The bad guy chases them and says that if he kills Fate in front of the girl, she will always obey him. Greed can somehow feel the man and tells Fate to knock down some boxes and face the man. Greed gets worried when the man uses his skill with sharp edges and tells Fate to just hit him with his sword. Fate does that and uses Greed to cut through everything it touches. Fate asks the bandana man, who was the holy knight who told him to kidnap the girl. The man won't tell Fate, so Fate uses some old-fashioned torture. The man can't stand the pain anymore and says that it was Hado. A short scene shows how wicked Hado is as he uses orphans for his shooting practice. Fate saves the girl though and finds that she is hungry. They say their names and go to eat. The girl seems like she has never eaten before as she tries to bite food that is very hot, and Fate tells her to be careful. Sahara cries as she has never had meat before, so Fate gives her his too. Later, Fate takes her to the orphanage and is surprised when someone thanks him for the first time ever. Fate says that he has a weak skill like she does, and it only makes him hungry. Even though Fate hated his life just yesterday, he thinks he has become some kind of mentor and gives Sahara some advice. He says that no matter how bad things are, if you can laugh at them, one day you will be happy. His father said these words to him. He didn't get it then, but his father's words helped him get this far. The guru says that this is why he wants Sahara to live too, and he leaves. A quick look at his stats shows that Fate is growing fast, and Greed praises him for learning his first skill with the sword, the sharp edge technique. This is important because with sword skills, he can use tech arts, which are like secret moves. This one lets Fate attack twice in one hit. That's the sharp edge technique that the bandana man was going to use. So Fate would have been in big trouble if he did. Greed says Fate is a hero, but Fate says he isn't, and he wouldn't have taken the risk if he knew about the sharp edge attack. Greed says that the truth is, battles depend on luck sometimes. There is no sure thing that the stronger one will always win. So Fate thinks that he was lucky this time. Fate tells himself that he wants to be stronger, strong enough to win without luck. Then Greed reminds him that he has to work for the hearts the next day, and Fate cries as he remembers that he didn't buy any clothes. In a bar, a man says that Sir Mason was killed by a divine dragon. He doesn't know what will happen to the Hart family, but Roxy might take his place. But Mr. Mason was the one who kept the Holy Knights from going crazy, and the old man doubts that even Lady Roxy can control them. The drunk asks about Fate, and the bartender says that he used to come here every day after work. The next day, Fate is amazed by the Knights district. The Hart estate is amazing too, and Roxy comes to meet him. Fate is shocked by how she looks, and she says he looks good too. After that awkward moment, Roxy makes another one by showing Fate her dead father. She says he died 5 days ago by a divine dragon in Galia. Fate thinks about how Galia is a land full of monsters. One of the Holy Knight's jobs is to stop them. Roxy says that it was the Hart family's turn this year. It was a hard job, but not one that should have killed him. But a divine dragon that had not left its nest for over 1,000 years wiped out her father's whole team. Fate can't believe that Roxy looked after him these past few days. Even though she was grieving for her father, She doesn't want him to be sad though. She is the leader of the house now and wants them to work together to make it a happy place. They try to shake hands, but Fate knows that it will make him read her mind, so he points at someone else. Haru is the main maid, and she asks Fate to act like a proper servant of the Heart family. Fate says yes, but he forgets that as he eats food like he's getting ready for a long sleep. He didn't tell anyone. A week later, Fate works so hard that the other servants tell him to rest. They think he is weird because they always see him talking to his sword, and he was trembling when he ate meat. Fate's stomach makes a loud noise in front of them, and they are shocked because they just ate. Fate is called to see Roxy, but his stomach keeps making noise and he doesn't know why. Roxy tries to talk to him, but Fate can only think about how he is getting hungrier and hungrier. He is afraid he will lose control, but Roxy stops him. They talk about their dead fathers, since Fate's father died in a monster hunt too. Roxy calls Fate family, but he wants to be more than that. Before he can say it though, she says no, and even more surprisingly, Fate starts to fall asleep. Later, Fate wakes up in his room with a note from Roxy telling him to take the day off. Fate asks Greed what is wrong with him, since his hunger has never been this bad, and he can't keep himself together. Greed says that once the Gluttony skill eats souls, it won't stop. The more Fate eats, the stronger he will get and the more he will want. Fate is meant to look for souls to eat until the day he dies. Fate asks what will happen if he doesn't eat, and is scared to hear that he will die of hunger or lose his mind and start attacking anyone near him. Fate can't accept that, as it makes him seem like a beast. Greed gives him some advice though. He tells Fate that his eyes will turn red when his hunger is almost full. Greed says that Fate's life has changed forever, and he can't go back now. Fate goes outside and sees some people. He is surprised to find that they smell good for some reason, and Greed says that it's because his hunger boost is on. His red eyes show that, and it's a short power that lets him use the Gluttony skill better. During this time, Fate will see better in the dark, find prey by smell, and weaker prey will be afraid and frozen. This makes sense as they leave the kingdom and see some goblins who are scared. Fate is not the same person he was before as he kills them all. After that, they go to the Hobgoblin Forest. Fate keeps killing, but he gets sad as he wonders how much more he needs to eat before he is not hungry anymore. Hours pass and Greed says that it's done. Fate hopes to never feel like that again, so Greed tells him that he will have to hunt monsters every once in a while and feed souls to Gluttony. Then Fate is shocked to see a Goblin King. It doesn't have much more stats than him, but it has a health regeneration skill. It heals wounds, and with it, Fate could keep fighting even if he got hurt. Fate wants some of that power and goes after the Goblin King. Fate gets sick though as the goblin eats a human, and Greed says that humans are good food for monsters. Fate sneaks up on the big troll, but stops for a moment when he sees the human body. The fight goes on, but Greed gets annoyed that Fate is only avoiding attacks. Fate is worried about getting hit, but Greed tells him to trust him, and he does. They manage to hit the last blow, and Fate is happy to see that his stats have gone up even more. He also gets the skill of health regeneration, but Fate is very tired now. Greed then says that with Fate's current stats, he can use Greed's first level and get a new form. All Fate has to do is give his stats to him as a gift. With his new form, Greed can give Fate new features. This sounds great, so Fate wants to try it, but he is shocked when Greed says that he has to give him all the stats he has earned since they met. Fate is not sure, but Greed says that his name is Greed after all. Fate is still not sure, so Greed says that if he doesn't do it, he will lose the right to use him. Greed says that Fate can get stronger by himself, or he can make him stronger too, and they can work together. Fate thinks that he doesn't have much choice, and Greed is the only partner for him. Greed tells him that he will be happy with it, and starts the process. It's a big sight, and Fate can feel the power leaving him. When the process is done, Greed shows his new form, which is a magic bow. A stupid goblin comes at the worst time for him, and Greed tells Fate to pull on the bow, and the magic arrows will show up by themselves. It's an amazing bow, as Fate can aim anywhere, and his arrow will always hit. After that, Fate takes some goblin ears and leaves them on the church door, which they will love to see in the morning. The next day, Roxy tries to sneak out of the house, but Fate doesn't know who she is, and tells her to hold up, thinking she's a thief. She gets a scare and turns around. Fate says, "Oops" for scaring her, and says she looks different than usual. He asks if she's heading to the castle, but she just says she's going to town on a secret checkup. She tells Fate to not tell anyone, especially Haru, who would diss her for dressing like that. Fate says he'll keep it a secret and tries to go back to work. Roxy then decides to make it a date in her head. She tells him that Fate will roll with her during the checkup. The two head off, but Roxy seems to be having a blast. He tells her to slow your roll, but she tells him to stop calling her Roxy, or people will spot her. She then asks him to call her Lexi. Greed is cracking jokes on Fate, who tells the sword to shut it. Roxy thinks those words were for her, and says sorry for being a drag. He tries to dodge a bullet, and she feels relieved. She says she is happy to hang out with him. Greed makes fun of their lovey-dovey moment, but Fate is sick of it and tries to chuck it away, but Roxy stops him. She says he can't treat his weapon like that. She then realizes that she never peeped his sword before. Fate realizes he's in big trouble because someone with a whack skill like him shouldn't have a sword. Plus, he can't tell anyone about his gluttony skill. He ends up dropping the sword and Roxy picks it up. After taking a quick look, Roxy says that Greed needs some fix-up and says she'll take him to her family's blacksmith. They then keep walking and Fate tells Greed that he'll finally get some shine, but Greed doesn't answer. He tries to check what's up, but Greed is just enjoying his moment after being touched by Roxy. He then says that Roxy smells good, making Fate want to throw him away, but Roxy tells him to hurry up. They leave the alley and step into the city streets. It's popping with live merchants and all kinds of people. Roxy sees some dope grapes and stops. The merchant says they're from the Hart family vineyard. She wants to try one, and the merchant gives her two. Fate tries one and thinks it's bomb. Roxy slips up and says that they grew them at home. The merchant is confused by her words. Fate realizes she might be exposed, but Greed gives him an idea. Fate steps in and says that one of her relatives works for the Hart family. The merchant buys it and walks away. She thanks him for saving her, but everyone's attention is drawn to something else. The Holy Knights are coming. The whole vibe of the city goes away. Everyone goes quiet and tries to look away. They are worried not knowing what the Holy Knight is doing here. They all think the low-rank Holy Knights have been abusing their power ever since Roxy's dad passed away. But Fate's stomach makes noise when the guy is passing by. Greed makes fun of it, but the Holy Knight gets mad. He asks who made that noise and gets near Fate. Fate gets on his knees and tries to say sorry, but the Holy Knight says he can't hear him. The nasty knight is about to kick Fate's head, but Roxy steps in. Roxy calmly explains that Fate had already apologized, but this unsightly guy starts hassling her. He's puzzled, wondering who this girl is that dares to talk back to a Holy Knight. But when he takes a good look at her, he almost recognizes her. The crowd around them starts murmuring, "Isn't that Roxy from the Hart family?" Fate starts to panic, worried that everyone will uncover the truth. But then Greed hatches a plan. They should pretend to be lovers. Fate is so taken aback that he repeats it out loud. Roxy hears it and thinks it's a brilliant idea. She helps Fate to his feet and tries to play along. She mentions that she had prepared breakfast for him, but he didn't need it. Fate tries to play along, and they end up having this improvised romantic moment. It gets so intense that even Greed thinks it's getting a bit awkward. Roxy seems to be enjoying it and apologizes to the knight before walking away. The crowd starts to disperse, convinced that she can't be Roxy Hart because Holy Knights can't cook. Roxy then pulls Fate into an alleyway. She admits that she's never linked arms with a boy before, but Fate can hear her thoughts. He hears her heart racing and apologizes, creating some distance between them. She brushes it off, saying she's used to it, and walks away cheerfully. Fate is left behind, thinking it might be tough for him to escort Roxy. He notices that she's stopped by a stall and is looking at a red gem. She explains that she's interested in them because she's a girl. She then spots some rocks and asks the merchant if they're also gems. The merchant explains that it's ore and it might contain a gem. It's a game of luck. The merchant reveals it costs 10 bronze coins per ore and asks if she wants to try. Greed explains that Fate can easily find the best ones using his identify skill. Fate then tries to look at the rocks until he notices Roxy simply looking at a blue gem. He realizes that she seems more like a normal girl than a holy knight. The merchant takes advantage of the moment, offering a discount if Fate buys the gem for his girl. Fate gets shy and Roxy decides to simply walk away. He follows her and she asks if Fate knows any warriors. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted by whispers of the Goblin Massacre. The city was abuzz with rumors that a high-level monster was responsible. Roxy, intrigued, pursued the two men discussing the massacre. One of them dismissed the monster theory, revealing that the Goblin King's ears had been donated to an orphanage. Roxy interjected, seeking more details about the roaming monster, but the men knew little and soon departed. Roxy then requested Fate to guide her to the warriors' gathering place. It dawned on Fate that Roxy was investigating the wandering monster that had been sighted around the city in recent days. He escorted her to a local bar, surprising the barman who had presumed Fate was dead. Fate introduced Roxy as his colleague, but the barman teased him about his sudden reappearance with a lady friend. Roxy, not offended but rather amused, shattered her cup, drawing applause from the crowd. Over a hearty meal, the barman shared what he knew about the mysterious Goblin Wiper. He explained that a warrior had discovered a heap of goblins with their ears intact, which was unusual as goblin ears were typically removed and sold for profit. Roxy speculated that a wandering monster from another region might be responsible. The barman expressed concern about the potential impact on the city's economy. The Goblin Plains were a crucial trade route, and fear of the monster could deter travelers, disrupting commerce. Fate began to comprehend the gravity of the situation. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of an elderly man who was shocked to see Fate, whom he too believed was dead. He shared additional information, suggesting that the roaming monster was a lich and that the Holy Knights were preparing to intervene. Greed warned Fate that this could spell trouble, given his diminished stats. However, Fate's primary concern was whether Roxy would join the hunt and discover his secret. A gang of road-weary warriors stroll into the local watering hole. You know the drill, they're all swagger and bravado. One of them, feeling a bit cheeky, slaps a hand on Roxy's shoulder, inviting her to join their merry band. Fate, ever the protector, rises to intervene, but Roxy's got this. With a swift move, she sends the guy flying into the wall. The room goes dead silent. Only a holy knight could pull off a stunt like that. Roxy, deciding to drop the act, reveals her true identity, apologizing for the ruse. The warriors, now quaking in their boots, drop to their knees, begging for mercy. They even try to bribe her for their lives. But Roxy ain't about that life. She doesn't want people living in fear of the Holy Knights, the very group sworn to protect them. She shares her late father's dream of a world where laughter isn't dictated by status. The old man in the corner recognizes her then, sees the spirit of her father in her. Fate, moved by her words, pledges his loyalty to Roxy, vowing to follow her until her dream is realized. After a night of camaraderie, Roxy takes Fate to meet Greed, the local blacksmith. Greed's all about that blade care, promising a faster cut after a good polish. Fate thanks Roxy for the introduction, but she brushes it off, saying he helped her gather intel on the wandering monster. Fate's curiosity is piqued. Why hadn't she known about the hunt? Roxy explains that ever since her father's passing, the Vlerick family has been pulling strings behind the scenes, keeping her in the dark. Their conversation is interrupted by a commotion outside. They find Hado roughing up a kid. Roxy steps in, demanding Hado let the kid go. The girl tries to justify their actions, but Roxy ain't buying it. She orders Fate to help the kid, and turns her attention to the trio's leader. She confronts him about the monster hunt, demanding to know why she was kept out of the loop. The guy tries to play it cool, suggesting she was too preoccupied with her father's death to be involved. But Roxy, she's not one to be trifled with, and she's ready to take matters into her own hands. Roxy insists she's okay, but the dude just shrugs her off and struts away. Hado, the loose cannon, calls Fate and the kid trash before he bounces. The kid then spills that he's got no love for Holy Knights, which has Roxy saying sorry. He's puzzled, but Fate quickly asks if he's lost his mom. The kid nods, and Roxy and Fate decide to help him find her. Fate remembers when he was lost in the city 5 years ago, and a female Holy Knight helped him out. He wonders what happened to her, 'cause he hasn't seen her since, but it's clear as day to us that it was Roxy, back when she rocked a pixie cut. After hours of searching, they still can't find the kid's mum. But then, like magic, she shows up, calling out for her son. Fate's stoked they found her, and he's totally smitten by Roxy's genuine smile. She catches him staring and asks what's up. He stammers out an excuse, saying it's getting late and they should head back. Roxy clocks the situation and makes him promise one thing. If they're in a jam, they're in it together. He swears they will, and they race home, only to get an earful from the head maid. Later that night, Fate asks Greed if there's a way to hunt monsters without Roxy finding out. Greed suggests a special mask. When Fate checks it out, he realizes it's enchanted with perception-altering magic. Greed explains that the mask will make him appear different to anyone who sees him. Fate thinks it's perfect and buys it. He also ends up buying an ore from another merchant and gives it to Roxy, who's a bit puzzled. He explains that she's been a huge help in his life and asks her to open it. Inside, she finds a massive blue gem. She promises to treasure it and asks if he wants a year's supply of meat or a whetstone for Greed as a reward. Greed's all for the whetstone, but Fate turns down both offers. Meanwhile, the Holy Knights are having a secret meeting without Roxy's knowledge. The trio's leader announces they'll be discussing their excursion to Gallia,